Let's get back to Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. After the negotiations between Vance and the Iranian side in Pakistan broke down, the United States began to blockade Iranian ports. Starting on Monday, they began to block ships entering and leaving Iranian ports. It was under this blockade that Iran actually started to soften its stance. It was only then that the speaker, or perhaps the foreign minister or other officials, began to show some flexibility in negotiations. At the time, many analysts believed that this blockade dealt a significant blow to Iran's economy, especially in terms of oil exports and the revenue generated from them. Actually, all of this revenue belongs to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So, in theory, such a blockade should deal a heavy blow to the economic power of the Revolutionary Guard. But if the Revolutionary Guard has remained so tough up to now, does that mean that this kind of economic blow doesn't really affect them much? Does it also mean that it doesn't pose much of a threat? What do you think about the current situation where the United States is trying to strangle them economically?
Politics overrides everything. If the regime is gone, what economic interests are left? They all think this way. Right? So now, coupled with a surge of nationalism and intense extreme Islamic ideology, they feel like they have nothing left, not even their fate. So this kind of mentality is very dangerous. Even if you manage to open up the Strait of Hormuz for a week or for 2 months, and then the United States says, all right, I've won, and Trump says, I'm out, goodbye, I'm withdrawing the troops, they can just block it again the very next day. Now that we've entered a cycle of blockade and counter-blockade, it's very difficult to say that countering the blockade will truly solve the problem. It's just treating the symptoms, not the root cause. So in the end, the current Iranian regime will still have to surrender and give in. Blockading the Strait of Hormuz is just one part of the whole process, right? So now, if Iran blockades the Strait of Hormuz, it's making itself an enemy of the whole world. But if Trump blockades the Strait of Hormuz, then it's just targeting Iran, right? So the world needs to clearly distinguish between right and wrong and understand the gravity of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So to make it clear, if you say that what Trump is doing is wrong, fine, then I'll leave. I'll go back to Huashan and you all can deal with the mess yourselves. I guarantee you, all of Europe and NATO will beg him not to leave. They'll still want to cling to the big power. Don't forget about the whole Ukraine and Russia situation. That's still unresolved, isn't it? So right now, unfortunately, Trump has exposed many of the hidden crises in the West, just like all the dark sides have been completely exposed.
Mm-hmm.
Way back during the administration of Obama and Biden, everything was treated just like dust under the carpet, where you would simply sweep the dust under the rug and cover it all up so that it was completely hidden from view. Now he's lifting up the carpet one by one, and it turns out there's so much trash underneath, along with cockroaches and flies and all that. He's just exposing it all. Sometimes it's better to have short-term pain than long-term pain. So you might say, well, he'll lose the midterm elections and he'll step down in the next term. But what happens if the Democrats come back next term? Should we release Maduro, like in Venezuela, and apologize, say, sorry, the person above us went crazy. Our previous president, Trump, went crazy. But now normal people are back and we're setting things right again. Sorry, something like that. Then Maduro comes back, is reinstated, becomes president again, and demands compensation from the U.S. government. Would you pay or not? When the time comes, if Kamala Harris becomes president, will you pay or not? Wasn't Trump a total mess? Shouldn't we correct our approach toward Iran? Back then, Trump made such grave mistakes, letting them continue their research and development of atomic bombs and then resuming negotiations with them, negotiating over and over again, starting all over just because of Trump. All he did was undo what the West and the U.S. had accomplished over the past 20 or 30 years. All the unresolved issues that had been delayed were completely exposed. Now, on the contrary, I'm really curious. If Trump steps down in 2 years and the Democrats return, will they reverse everything Trump did and apologize to Iran? And what will they say to China about Iran? Trump back then wanted to suppress China, but he was wrong. He just didn't want China to become strong. Now we've admitted our mistake. Now we acknowledge China's rise. You are the new boss now. We're just the humble number two, and we willingly admit defeat. Would everything be reversed like that? You need to provide compensation to Iran. You need to formally apologize to Iran. You need to atone to Maduro's Venezuela. Is that what should happen? Cancel all tariffs, right? This is the biggest suspense. All right. So you say in this case, Trump is utterly unforgivable. He also shouldn't let others commit offenses like Rubio and so on. When the next president from the Democratic Party comes back, a full-scale counterattack. If Harris and AOC, those two darlings, get into the White House, I wonder what will happen to America. When faced with this difficulty, they'll just throw up their hands and say, we can't handle it anymore. These are problems left behind by Trump, right? Oh, isn't it just the same old routine? So the leftists, first, they're lazy, and second, they're foolish. Third, they're hypocritical. These three main traits are all present in Western leftists, whether it's the current Labour Prime Minister in the UK or those in America, places like New York, Los Angeles, and all those leftist intellectuals in Silicon Valley. They all share these characteristics. It's just a mess, a big headache. Now, since so many of you are hoping for hope, deep down, you secretly hope that Trump will be utterly defeated. Well, if I were Trump, fine, then I just wouldn't do it anymore, right? You guys can take over now, okay? Look at Europe, look at the British government's behavior, look at Canada's Carney and Australia. Just look at the faces they're showing now. It's completely different from 3 years ago. Back then, they were all sanctimonious, right? Sanctimonious. But when faced with real evil forces, they all turn out to be cowards. In front of Iran, Britain and France are just cowards. It's just that simple.
Yeah, that's simple. You just mentioned Harris and AOC moving into the White House. Wow, I think that's an absolutely terrifying image. My God, those two entering the White House, that scene is just too frightening. But as for Trump, I think he's someone who's sharp-tongued but soft-hearted to some extent. He says things like, I'm not going to care about the Strait of Hormuz anymore, you guys take care of it. But in action, that's not the case at all. As for the blockade, he says, I'll just keep the blockade going. So far, it seems like this move is less costly than a ground operation. Anyway, his navy is there, taking care of things. In any case, up to now, 23 ships have already turned back to Iranian ports, right? So I'll just keep the blockade going. But if Iran still refuses to surrender or compromise, I think Trump might not have any better options either. Unless he continues to bomb them, he did say, we can keep bombing. The problem is, if they won't surrender under a blockade, they won't surrender if you bomb them either. So, do you think that in the end, how this wraps up will be a problem? Or does it actually not matter? After all, the US can just end things whenever it wants. The blockade can go on indefinitely, and otherwise they can just withdraw and return home.
Well, withdrawing and returning home is, of course, a rather dramatic scenario, like something out of Journey to the West, right? But I think in reality, in the real world, the blockade will just continue. Yes, that's it.
Keep the blockade. As for the rest,
they'll take care of the rest. Right? As for the rest, I think on one hand, they'll keep up the blockade to see if they can strangle Iran.
Yes, exactly.
Hurting the enemy by 3,000 but losing 800 yourself. Just let global oil prices keep rising. During this time, the U.S. will desperately ramp up domestic shale oil and petroleum production. As for things like the green economy or electric vehicles, all of that will just be swept aside. You don't need to talk about it anymore. Things like the Paris Agreement and so on, forget about them. What carbon reduction or emission cuts? No one is talking about that anymore. Anyway, he has already changed the entire global economic landscape. So in the future, the whole world will have to pay the price. Everyone globally will pay. If the blockade continues, I want to know, will Western public opinion keep blaming Trump or will they blame Iran? Isn't that right? Now, it seems like the whole world sees the only enemy as the United States, as if Iran bears no responsibility at all. So, regarding this blockade, of course, I think from a pragmatic standpoint, the blockade will continue. As for whether to carry out airstrikes, we have to see how confident we are. Right now, 70% has already been destroyed. I think this has already dealt a major blow. Iran's Air Force and Navy have suffered tremendous destruction. So as long as we can delay their ability to develop nuclear weapons by 20 years, then the question becomes whether or not the Strait of Hormuz will be blockaded. As for the impact this will have on the world economy, the blow it will deal, this is a necessary price to pay, right? So I think the mission is basically accomplished now. That is to say, Iran no longer has the immediate capability to produce several nuclear bombs. Of course, it's said that there are still how many kilograms left?
That is, the more than 400 kilograms of enriched uranium they have, that needs to be
poured out.
Trump basically said either they hand it over or we'll go get it ourselves. In short, he wants to get it out of there. But on this point, Iran is firmly opposed. Iran says this is absolutely a matter of our sovereignty, and we will never, absolutely never, hand it over to another country.
In that case, there's really nothing left to discuss, right? Back then, you just wouldn't surrender. I think Trump, America, had their own plan, which was to study how to launch a raid and get those 450 kilograms of uranium out. Up to now, maybe this plan hasn't reached its final stage yet, right? If it does come to that, pulling off this operation would be a beautiful way to wrap things up. Of course, that's where things stand now. There are a lot of leftists in America who hate Trump and can't wait for him to make a move, hoping that if he does, all those American soldiers will be wiped out. So that's actually the biggest problem. In my view, Trump is under a lot of pressure as well. Now, as for the visit to China scheduled for mid-May, will he still go this time or will it be postponed again? We'll find out the answer to that soon, right? Because right now, nothing is certain, since, as you know, China said that a certain person spoke with him over the phone. He was told not to ship weapons to Iran, and he said he never has and never will. Oh, my good friend promised he wouldn't do it. These words sound so naive, almost unbelievable, don't they? Haha. What exactly did your good friend promise? Can that really be counted on? Will it mean anything? Just look at what's happening in Hong Kong. Of course, it's all just a performance. We know that. So there's still a China factor involved over there, right? So now I think Trump is facing an unprecedentedly tough challenge. I think his bombing of Iran and sending in a sudden strike force of elite troops, this legion will either deal with or seize those 450 gin of oil or take it away. Grabbing that oil is still part of the plan, right? But before carrying it out, they'll continue the blockade. That's the only way, isn't it?
Speaking of China, today Trump posted another tweet. Well, maybe it was last night. He said this: President Xi is very happy. The Strait of Hormuz is opening up. He said, our meeting in China will be a very special, historic meeting. I'm very much looking forward to meeting President Xi. The other day, didn't he post something saying, oh, China has agreed not to supply weapons to Iran? And now he's saying, I'm very happy to go to Beijing. I think one of his purposes is still to issue a warning, right? When you say they've agreed not to supply weapons, you're actually implying that you are supplying weapons to Iran. Come on, do you think I don't know? He's giving the CCP a warning. Another thing, I think he also hopes that China will put pressure on Iran because, after all, the strait was blocked. This also affects the CCP, doesn't it? He also hopes Beijing will continue to put pressure on Iran, but I don't think Iran will necessarily listen.
Iran might not listen. In other words, now China, this is affecting Trump's posture toward China in mid-May. This posture has turned into needing something from China, needing something from Xi Jinping. So now it's like China has turned from guest to host, right? And now, in the past few days, Western public opinion is acting like a cheerleader, relying on China to fight the devil. In other words, China is seen as the only winner, and China will become such a naturally legitimate moral force. China's stance is considered the most just. Or don't think that this is safe. This is actually very dangerous. For example, you can't even resolve the issue of the Strait of Hormuz because China could blockade the Taiwan Strait at any time. I recently saw that Time magazine had a special article saying that what Trump is doing is very dangerous, that it could provoke China to blockade the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait. But actually, all of this is just empty threats and intimidation. We all know what the real situation is. This risk really isn't that high. When the Time magazine reporter wrote this article, they didn't realize that Zhang Yuxia and Liu Zhenli had both been arrested. This entire wave of missile troops has been completely wiped out. They just want to intimidate Trump, so this will also create a certain kind of pressure. At that time, Trump or his advisors might say, right now, we still need something from China, whether it's asking China for help or giving China a hard time, whether it's Jinshan or lower-level officials asking China for assistance anyway, after they return. It's all about Iran. In the future, if things keep going this way, I'll just ask on behalf of China. Like that. And then what happens? They add more tariffs, but this tariff card, as time goes on, seems to be less effective than it used to be, right? So ideally, it would be best to go to China again by the end of April. Previously, there was a major breakthrough regarding the situation with Iran. Otherwise, the longer things drag on, the more unpredictable things become, and the situation could get more complicated, right?
Do you think the CCP will continue to provide weapons to Iran?
I don't think so. How would you even call it providing weapons? They break up the weapons. They split them up, dismantle them, send different parts, or sometimes they come from, some are resold through third countries, some go through Hong Kong using shell companies. with Hong Kong identities, using Hong Kong cargo ships to transport them, and then they're delivered to Iran for assembly. So technically, they haven't provided weapons. Xi Jinping hasn't lied. He can say, we really haven't provided weapons, right? It's just that the parts are dismantled. And then they just let them assemble it. Isn't that right? So this kind of communication is really meaningless. It's pointless. You have to understand, when dealing with China, it's been decades, starting from Nixon to George H.W. Bush up to now. I don't think the United States is as naive as a 3-year-old child, right? And it's not like they've completely lost their memory either. How things were before, how they are today, and what they'll be like in the future. I'm thinking Trump can't be that naive, right?
Yes, that's right. Hong Kong has now become a transit hub, especially in finance. I remember Besant recently said that banks helping Iran with these kinds of transfers would face secondary sanctions. I think some of those banks must be in Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is actually, I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal last time saying that there are many entities helping Iran evade sanctions. Many of these so-called shell companies set up by banks are based in Hong Kong. They do these kinds of things through Hong Kong. Yes, that's right.
Because over the past few decades, there have been many, many mainland immigrants. They have immigrated to Hong Kong by various means and have already obtained Hong Kong SAR passports. They call themselves Hong Kongers abroad. And with the SAR passport, they travel all over the world. Other countries also treat them as Hong Kongers. Why is that? Because the original Hong Kong population always talked about identity, saying, we are Hong Kongers. In the eyes of the Communist Party, this is infuriating. For millions of you to keep proudly calling yourselves Hong Kongers, well, I just want to erase your Hong Kong identity, your identity as Hong Kongers. So it's like cutting off the source altogether. That's why, just like with immigration or the Sinicization of Tibet, from now on, being a Hong Konger doesn't mean much anymore. It's basically the same as being Chinese, right? Now, I think there are still quite a few countries that allow visa-free entry with a Hong Kong SAR passport. But you see, there will gradually be a change. As for those big banks in Hong Kong like HSBC, they can't just stop doing this business, can they? The global economy is so one-sided right now, isn't it? 70% of HSBC's profits now come from Asia, and most of that is from the Chinese market. They've been relying on Chinese people to make money for more than 10 years already. And now there are also American insurance companies involved. There are a lot, right? So the saying, you are in me and I am in you, isn't just empty words. So now Benson's statement might also be a foreshadowing. There may be moves against Hong Kong in the near future. I think...
Yes. I think this war is also a kind of public opinion war, an information war that's really exploding right now. There are all kinds of opinions. Some say Iran is the winner. Some say, of course, just like you mentioned earlier, that China is the winner. And of course, many conservatives say the United States is the winner because look at the US now with its energy exports. Just from this alone, from the Gulf of Mexico, nowadays there are a lot of tankers going there to load oil. They say that now daily crude oil exports have already exceeded 5 million barrels. And of course, natural gas and so on. The US is one of the largest exporters of those as well. Then, of course, many people also say Israel is the winner because Israel dragged the United States into this war. So in your view, in this war, who do you think is the loser and who is the winner?
As we discussed in previous episodes, what does it mean for the United States to be defeated? How do we define an American loss? Some people compare it to the Vietnam War, where the US lost more than 50,000 soldiers. This time so far, only about a dozen have been killed. Even if the US were to escalate the war against Iran, the nature of warfare today is completely different from what it was during the Vietnam War. Right now, the only thing is that Trump has apparently planned to have General Motors, Ford, and that other company
join the national defense production effort.
He wants them to fully switch to defense production and is asking Congress for $200 billion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you say the U.S. is the loser, that means if someone loses, of course, someone else wins, right? Like in a game of ping pong, if the U.S. is the loser, does that mean Iran is the winner? If Iran wins, then after successfully blockading the Strait of Hormuz, Iran could control global oil prices. So that would mean in the future, New York and London would be joined by Tehran as the third international financial city. There would be no more Dubai, no more Abu Dhabi, right? This would be the case in the foreseeable future in the coming years. The world's financial center would no longer be Hong Kong. Of course, it hasn't been Hong Kong for a while. It should move to Tehran, or perhaps the renminbi would become an internationally circulated currency and would be released right now. Gradually, it would replace the US dollar, right? And then would English also decline along with this? More and more people in Iran and the Middle East would be learning Mandarin. Isn't that right? And also, America's Hollywood, its foreign trade, and its cultural soft power would all be in decline. In the future, people in the US, Canada, and other Western countries would all be watching Zhang Yimou's movies, watching Wu Jing's Wolf Warrior, or watching Chinese TV dramas. This would be called America's failure. You have to clearly define what America's failure means. Even when the US withdrew from the Vietnam War, it wasn't considered a failure, right? The ones who failed were Vietnam and Cambodia. We can see that even though the US has gone through things like 9/11, those crises, and then withdrew from Afghanistan, and now with Trump as president, the definition of America's failure is if the whole world, including China, starts sending their children to Iran, to Tehran to study, if they move their household registrations and money and their children to Tehran, or if everyone stays in China and doesn't want to leave, then that would be called an American failure, right? So now if America really fails, Trump would become a war criminal. Then the International Court, the Hague Tribunal, would put Trump, Pence, Rubio, and Hegesias, these war criminals, on trial and sentence them to death. And then at the international level, the Hague Tribunal judges should invite China, Iran, and Canada, don't forget Canada, and also the UK to send judges. They would put Trump and this American fascist regime on trial and sentence them according to the law. Then the United States would become like Germany in 1945. That's what's called defeat. Even after 1945, when Germany was divided into East and West, up to today, isn't Germany still a defeated nation? Isn't it? Even up to today, it's still a defeated nation. So when we talk about the UK and the US being defeated, we have to look at it broadly and narrowly in the short term and the long term. From both perspectives, I don't see any signs of the US being defeated. Isn't that right? You could say that Trump will fail. In 2 years, no matter what, Trump will have to step down, right? You could also say the midterm elections were a failure. But whether it's truly a failure or not, you have to look at the Democrats. If the left wing of the Democratic Party steps down, are they voluntarily giving up global power? That would be called a failure. So when those people go and talk to these 3-year-olds, they're just saying things that 3-year-olds want to hear, and it makes them happy. Well, letting them be happy for a while isn't necessarily a bad thing, is it?
Yeah, right. I think some people believe that as long as you haven't achieved a complete victory, as long as there hasn't been a regime change in Tehran, then it's a failure. But actually, I don't think regime change is that far off. After all, the head of Israel's Mossad has already come out and said that they have a whole set of plans and that regime change takes time. We will carry out our plans, and he also criticized. He refuted it, saying, what does it mean for us, Israel and the United States, to guarantee in advance that as long as you join the war, there will be regime change? He said, we've never made such a guarantee. I think the Israelis are very familiar with the situation in Iran. So a lot of the rumors out there, I think, are probably not true at all.
Israel has indeed stated that its goal in the war is regime change.
Yes.
This is something I mentioned last month when we talked. I also said that overthrowing and secularizing the regime is the most difficult part. But only by achieving this can you solve the problem once and for all, right? You'd have to parachute in a MacArthur or something. To rewrite the entire constitution for Iran, that would be the ideal outcome. It's a result that everyone in the world, except for a few particularly dark-hearted people, would like to see. But as I've also said, this is the most difficult thing to achieve, right? But that doesn't mean that sometimes things won't happen suddenly. Sometimes it's like an avalanche effect, right? Some things take effect 3 or 5 years later, unfolding gradually. Just like when the Berlin Wall fell, no one expected it at the time, and then the Soviet Union collapsed and all of Eastern Europe disintegrated, right? But no one expected that later on, someone like Putin would rise to power. So historical events have a process. There is a process of cause and effect, a certain law of occurrence and development for things. You see, there is a certain law to this. Sometimes we don't need to be too anxious. What is meant to happen will definitely happen, including the change of regime in Iran, right? So there are many people who they're rather impatient or quite agitated. Now, with the addition of social media and various forces infiltrating each other, there is a huge amount of fake news and a lot of counter comments. So compared to the time of the Vietnam War, this is a big difference. During the Vietnam War, Americans watched TV at home. And then they saw, for example, the US military going to bomb those Vietnamese villages, and occasionally saw many American soldiers coming back battered and exhausted. This led to the formation of the anti-war movement, but they weren't looking at the bigger picture. All of the American voters at that time were acting for their own interests. Honestly, if I were an American, a college student, and you forcibly drafted me for no reason and sent me to Vietnam, I would also come back deeply traumatized. As for whether the United States is some kind of big brother of world democracy, I don't care about that. So now, with today's parliamentary democracy, this kind of short-sighted mentality among voters is becoming more and more serious. Lying flat, and then the American left says, me, me, me. Everything revolves around themselves. This is called the me generation, meaning a reliance on the self. They lack a broader perspective, have no sense of nationhood, and don't consider America's role in the world. Responsibility and obligation. If you ask the next generation of Americans, why are you able to enjoy such a good life now? Why do you get to live so comfortably? Why does the whole world use the US dollar? It's because American soldiers have paid with their lives since the Pacific War to secure this for you. They don't understand this at all, completely clueless. The remarkable naivety and profound ignorance of many Americans, along with their incredibly narrow and strikingly superficial perspective on the complexities of world history, is truly astonishing. Don't you agree?
Young Americans probably really need to learn more about this part of American history, about America's glorious past. But American soldiers are still highly respected in the US. Just the other day, I saw a story about someone who saw 17 American soldiers eating burgers and fries at a restaurant. When they finished and went to pay the bill, it turned out the owner said someone had already paid their bill for them. So Americans still have a lot of respect for their soldiers, for American servicemen.
I hope that's the case. I really do. Because recently I also saw some news saying that American troops now have a sense of resistance, that they might not obey orders from Trump.
I think that's probably just a few isolated cases. Right, it could also be fake news. Fake reports.
Yeah, you're right about that. So there are definitely some other things.
Recent fake reports claim US carriers in the Middle East face food shortages with limited rations. US Central Command recently released photos refuting these rumors, confirming no food supply issues.
These are just really low-level rumors. You know, for some people, eating is more important than anything else. They eat all day long. It's even more important to them than being a decent person. So they come up with these kinds of rumors. But as soon as we hear them, we know they're fake, right?